Have here are a whole string of wrong ideas about Mars, the history of the solar system, the history of the Earth, and the recent history of these planets. So this 4.6 billion year old clockwork solar system is a myth. Of course, by studying mostly meteorites and using radioactive dating techniques, specifically looking at daughter isotopes, scientists think they have determined that the solar system is 4.6 billion years old. But this requires that the solar system has not been disturbed to any great degree since it was formed. It also relies on the idea that it was formed in the way that was advertised, and that is via a nebula. What I want to do in this talk is to show you that the story is completely different, and it's much more interesting than the fairy tale we've been taught. No theory of planet formation works. But that doesn't stop us seeing and hearing through the media the familiar story about the 4.6 billion year old formation of the planets. In the case of the Earth, there's all these unanswered questions. Why do we have an atmosphere of oxygen? Where did all the nitrogen come from? And why do we have so much water? In fact, why is there so much sodium chloride in the water? None of these questions are really answered by the standard theory. A speculative story of Earth's history involving catastrophic extinctions has been concocted. And as I said, Mars has a fabricated history too, with the Amazonian and the Noachian periods. The electric universe accepts evidence that petroglyphs are an enduring record of the frightening collapse of a former cosmos. And this is the starting point of this new story. It has taken 10,000 years for us to be able to see in laboratory plasma discharge experiments what our forebears saw in awesome cosmic proportions in the sky. I would say that petroglyphs are the Rosetta Stones of the recent history of the solar system. The monumental effort involved in carving them shows that what was happening in the celestial arena was of paramount concern to the prehistoric artists. It was a concern that still has echoes in our doomsday nightmares. Velikovsky challenged astronomers again at the 1974 AAAS ambush in San Francisco. He said, "I was greatly surprised to find that astronomy, the queen of sciences, lives still in the pre-Faraday age, not even in the time of kerosene lamps, but candles and oil. Nothing has changed, so powerful is the Newtonian ideology." The evidential history is quite different, and this story is built on the evidence, looking at it from the point of view of Velikovsky and those mytho-historians like David Talbot, Eduardo Cardona and F. Cochrane, who have extended his research. The first thing is that to deal with is the idea that Saturn had a former state as a brown dwarf, and a brown dwarf is not actually a dwarf star in the electric universe. It is quite huge. The planets, Saturn's entourage of satellites and planets, actually existed within a vast glowing plasmasphere. For instance, it's been said that if we could witness Jupiter's plasmasphere from the Earth when it's in opposition, it would appear the size of the full moon or the sun in the sky. So if you can imagine Proto-Saturn having that kind of size, all of the satellites of Saturn, and also, if you were to apply that to Jupiter, those inner satellites would all be within that plasmasphere. Brown dwarfs flare, and this is a surprise to astronomers because they're supposed to be failed stars. They shouldn't have the energy to flare, but they do. So they must dump matter on their satellites. And this can be an answer to many conundrums about the formation of the planets. Water. We know that Saturn, the rings of Saturn are water ice, so here is the origin of the water for the Earth. Oxygen, reddish light, low gravity, gave rise to the Earth's plant and animal gigantism, the era of megafauna and megaflora. Evidence of the breakup of this earlier system, given in Symbols of an Alien Sky and Eduardo Cardona's Star series of books, has been around for some years now and is available for research for those who would like to test these ideas against what the MAVEN mission finds. And of course, as we've seen, the hard evidence of the thunderbolts between planets, which sculpted the Martian surface, came from high-energy plasma experiments. So this is a summary. Earth and Mars were planets orbiting a brown dwarf star in a previous life. You could say that we are the aliens in this solar system. It was the most hospitable environment for life. And this is something that astronomers have come to recognise in recent years. However, they still talk about a Goldilocks zone. If a planet orbiting around a faint dwarf star or a red dwarf star is in a particular orbit, it can harbour life. What I'm saying is different. The electric universe proposes that the real environment for life is within the actual glowing, huge envelope of these red stars. The atmosphere, water and minerals are deposited, and this can explain layering of moons and planets. The system broke up on encountering the sun, and I will describe this in detail. And interplanetary thunderbolts stripped the surface of Mars. So let's talk, we've presented quite a bit of material in this conference about stars and planets forming in cosmic thunderbolts. So we can expect that the Earth and Mars and Saturn, or Proto-Saturn as we call it in its stellar form, were formed in one of these cosmic lightning bolts in a molecular cloud, close enough together so that once the discharge abated, they were able to form a small planetary system. Now, one of the things about stars formed in this model, and it refers both to Don Scott's presentation and also to Markland convection, as Don said, the heavy elements concentrate at the centre of these discharges. So the cores of stars are composed of heavy elements. That's not hydrogen. So there can be no hydrogen fusion at the centre of the sun or of any star. They all have cool, heavy element cores. In the electric universe model, and I've written about this on my website, electricity plays a central role in both the capture and the stabilisation of orbits, so that capture is far more likely in the electric universe than in the gravitational universe. In fact, this is one of the difficulties that astronomers had to deal with early on, was that a body passing by the sun will normally just swing past it and then off again. There's nothing to reduce the energy of the incoming object so that it is captured. But in the electric universe, as I will discuss, that is possible. In fact, it's likely. The other thing is that one of the big puzzles that have affected planetary scientists in recent years with the discovery of so many so-called exoplanets, that is planets around nearby stars, is that they found these hot Jupiters orbiting the central star extremely closely, some of them going around in a matter of hours or days. There is another aspect of the formation of stars, and that is that if an instability occurs during the formation of the star, as I discussed the other day, each celestial body has an internal electric field. Positive charge towards the centre, negative charge at the surface. If you can imagine, if the centre of the object is positively charged and there's a slight displacement, then there is an accelerating electric force which can actually cause the object to fission. And this may be the explanation for why stars exist in a narrow range of sizes. This is also not explained well by the gravitational story. So, in the electric universe, brown dwarfs are not failed stars, too low in mass to sustain hydrogen fusion reactions. As I said, there are no hydrogen fusion reactions. Stars are powered electrically. Red dwarfs, shining brightest in infrared, represent about 70% of the stars in the Milky Way. So these are the most likely places to find life. Those faint dwarf stars might be called the galaxy's, silent majority. But red dwarfs come with a major drawback. Their stellar radii are hard to determine accurately, and this is where the astronomers have missed the point, that red dwarfs are not dwarf stars. They are huge. All red stars are huge, for the simple reason that a star that is not capable of attracting sufficient electrons to satisfy the current demands of their electrical environment will expand their photosphere. In fact, the red dwarfs and so on don't actually have a bright photosphere. So the plasma sheath around them expands until it can intercept sufficient electrons to maintain the discharge. These pictures here of red stars, you can see some of the stars are so big, the giant ones, that they can be measured from the Earth. Betelgeuse is a good example, which its envelope would actually reach to the orbit of Jupiter. So in that particular case, if Betelgeuse does have satellites, they are orbiting within that red glowing sphere. Now, a brown dwarf is no different. You don't have to have different models for different stars in the electric universe. So a brown dwarf is a small star with a very large glowing envelope. Jupiter, the gas giants and so on, if you like, if Jupiter and Saturn were now taken outside the solar system, they would once again become brown dwarfs. In December 2008, NASA found that the brightness of a nearby brown dwarf at 17 light years distance was twice that expected for a brown dwarf with its particular temperature. This is using the standard model of stars. So the solution, completely ad hoc, the object must have twice the surface area, it must be twins. Now the electric universe says, I mean, that is just an amazing ad hoc solution. The spectra of red dwarfs are crowded with molecular absorption features that are not well understood. So it's hard to extract the physical properties of a given red dwarf from its spectrum. That is also interesting. But the fact that there are so many molecular absorption features indicates that all of the requirements for life exist within that glowing envelope. So, all stars are electric. All red stars are gigantic. Planets can orbit within their anode glow, and even astronomers acknowledge that. They have suggested that there could be satellites orbiting within the Betelgeuse glow. However, with their notion that the red giant is formed by an ultra-hot core, those planets would not be suitable for life. In the electric universe, it has a cool core. Objects orbiting within the red envelope are suitable for life. Now, one of the very interesting things is that there are no seasons on any satellites orbiting within that red sphere, because the energy received on any body within that sphere is equal over the entire surface of that body. So that a planet orbiting within that red sphere has no seasons, even temperatures. In fact, I would say that brown dwarfs are the cosmic wombs of life in the universe. One of the interesting facts, of course, that would suddenly come out of this is that these red spheres are glowing plasma, and glowing plasma will not let radio waves pass through. So the search for extraterrestrial intelligence using radio waves is, in my opinion, a wasted effort, because anyone living on a satellite inside one of these glowing red wombs would not even be aware that there was a greater universe out there full of stars, let alone try and use radio, because any radio signals would not pierce that plasma. Just an interesting side issue here. So this is my view of Proto-Saturn, and I've just put 2 satellites there, but there are obviously more. Titan, for instance, would have been one of the satellites. Earth and Mars. So there they are inside this glowing shell, and the evidence of the earliest recollections of mankind appears to be that the purple dawn of creation was the skylight. That was the colour of the sky, purple dawn. And that is precisely the colour you would expect in this circumstance, because you have the red end of the spectrum, and you also have a certain amount of the violet and ultraviolet light due to electrical activity in the plasma. So this fits with the if you like, the earliest recollections of mankind, that was our environment. 50% of red dwarfs have Earth-sized planets in their habitable zone. Remember I said that astronomers feel this is the place where life is most likely to be found. Now if you look at Jupiter, for instance, and consider that as a red dwarf and its plasma sphere was lit up, Io has a 1.75-day orbit, Europa has a 3.5-day orbit, Ganymede 7 days and Callisto 17 days. Any of the satellites that were released from Jupiter's grip would have a rotation rate which equaled their daily rotation rate because they're locked always with the same face towards the central body. It suggests that the Earth and Mars had orbits which were about a day in length. This is the kind of information that you can get from this kind of model. The other thing is, you'll notice in this diagram, there is no Venus. So, we have a huge red anode glow, which was what we call Proto-Saturn. We had a purple dawn of creation and no Venus. These are the important things to understand about Proto-Saturn. Just recently, a map of a nearby red dwarf was produced using a Doppler imaging technique. It's one of a pair of red dwarfs near Alpha Centauri with a separation of 3 astronomical units. There's a bright near-polar region which can be clearly seen in the upper right panels, and a darker mid-latitude area visible in the lower left panels is consistent with large-scale cloud inhomogeneities. However, that's an assumption that what we're looking at is an atmosphere, but we're not looking at an atmosphere, we're looking at a plasma sheath. So this variation said in the electric universe model will be due to objects orbiting within that plasma sheath, either inside or outside that plasma sheath, because that would affect the discharge. The other thing is that this bright spot towards the pole is the same kind of thing that's found at Betelgeuse, the red giant, which indicates that that's the electrical connection with the Birkeland currents that drive these particular stars. If I'm right, the patterns here should be more repetitive than weather patterns and without banding like Jupiter, which is undetectable so far by this technique, but you never know what they can do tomorrow. Red dwarfs and giants change in radius, which is not the kind of thing that you would expect if this is a normal body. However, this change in radius is the star's response to changes in its electrical environment. It's quite natural. It's a plasma effect. They also tend to flicker in brightness. All of this is indicative of a star lacking the stabilising effect of the bright photosphere of bright stars. That's according to Don Scott's transistor model. That is a stabilising influence in all bright stars. Red stars don't have that luxury. Proto-Saturn's capture. This is the interesting part of it. This took me decades to try and figure out because the model of planets arranged with their poles in a line is unstable. There's no Newtonian theory to explain a daisy chain of planets. So it eventually dawned on me that what we had was a dynamic arrangement where Proto-Saturn, which is in this diagram over here, that's Proto-Saturn, and you can just see a few little brighter red dots behind it. They are the Earth and Mars and other satellites. That's meant to represent those satellites. The explanation came to me once I had realised that the stabilisation of the planetary orbits as we see them today, why is the Newtonian system a clockwork system, or it appears to be a clockwork system, when you only have one force? Well, the answer is you cannot have a stable system with one force. There has to be a feedback mechanism. And as I explained the other day, you can change the mass of a planet or a star by either placing charge on it or taking charge away. And it occurred to me that a small star like Proto-Saturn entering the environment of the Sun would suffer a drastic change in its electrical environment, with a result, actually, that Proto-Saturn would have become one gigantic comet, because a body which is negatively charged with respect to its environment is a cometary body, and a body that's positively charged with respect to its environment is an anode in the discharge, and it is a star. So this was a change, a sudden change, once Proto-Saturn approached the solar system at that time closely. At least it would have been most drastic once it entered the heliosphere, the boundary of the Sun's environment with interstellar space. So Saturn as a comet is removing electrons, and the result is that it is losing mass, it's accelerating towards the Sun. The bodies behind it, actually, sorry, I got that around the wrong way. The Proto-Saturn itself is losing electrons, as comets do. They are being passed on to its satellites. The satellites are gaining in mass. Saturn is losing in mass. Conservation of energy says that Proto-Saturn accelerates towards the Sun, and this is part of the electrical capture mechanism. The Earth and Mars and the other satellites gaining in mass will tend to fall behind and line up, rather like Comet Shoemaker Levy 9. The electrical discharge, the polar discharge, in my opinion then, is the central column of Saturn's cometary discharge. We were sitting in this cometary tail, right in the middle of it. And all of the plasma discharge effects that were witnessed by the ancients and chiselled into rock come from that period of capture. I've said as a cometary body, Proto-Saturn loses electrons, it accelerates towards the Sun. All of this could explain all of the plasma phenomena, discharge phenomena, recounted by Dave Talbot and Eduardo Cardona. The latest measurements by Pitieva and Standish suggest the astronomical unit is increasing about 23 feet per century. That means that the Earth is actually, its orbit is shifting over time. But according to the beliefs of astronomers, the astronomical unit shouldn't change at all. The mechanism I'm describing for the modification of gravity provides a mechanism that can be tested, because the Earth's orbit expansion should be a discontinuous function with discrete jumps following major solar storms and at Venus's inferior conjunction, when we sit in the cometary tail of Venus. So there are various means of testing these ideas too, outrageous as they may seem.